The warning alarms blared through the cramped cockpit as Lieutenant James Hartfield wrestled with the controls of his failing spacecraft, the Endeavor. Each shudder and jolt sent a fresh surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. The alien planet's atmosphere clawed at the Endeavor as if eager to swallow it whole. "Come on, old girl, hold together," James muttered, glancing at the rapidly approaching surface on the monitor. With a deafening crash that tore through the hull of the spacecraft like paper, James felt the world go black. When he came to, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the hiss of leaking oxygen. James' first breath was ragged, filled with the tang of burnt circuits and the sharp, clean air of an alien world. He activated his emergency beacon. Then, with shaky legs, he staggered out of the wreckage and into the lush, unfamiliar terrain. He hadn't gone far when he stopped, stunned. Not far from the smoking remains of his ship, a figure stood silhouetted against the setting sun of Alicia. The figure was tall and slender, humanoid but distinctly alien, with smooth, iridescent skin that shimmered with an inner light. The alien watched him, head tilted in curiosity rather than fear. "Hello," James called out, waving one hand slightly, unsure of the local customs. The universal translator clipped to his belt sprang to life, converting his words into a series of melodious tones. The alien responded in kind, her voice a cascade of harmonious chimes that somehow conveyed warmth. "Greetings, traveler. I am Mira of Alicia. You've fallen from the sky." James chuckled nervously, adjusting his translator. "Yes, I suppose I did. I'm James, from Earth." Mira stepped closer, her movements graceful and fluid. "James from Earth, are you in need of aid?" Her tone was tinged with concern, yet her large, opalescent eyes sparkled with an intelligent curiosity. "A bit of help wouldn't go amiss," James admitted, looking back at the wreckage of his spacecraft. "But first, may I ask, have your people encountered humans before?" "No," she replied, her gaze sweeping over him. "You are the first." Their conversation was momentarily interrupted as another figure approached. This one, another Elysian, was shorter, with darker skin that glowed faintly blue in the twilight. "Mira, who is this?" he asked, his voice a deeper series of musical notes. "This is James from Earth. He crashed," Mira explained, turning to the newcomer with a gesture of introduction. "This is Taller, my colleague in the field of xenobiology." "Pleased to meet you," James said, extending his hand in human fashion. Taller looked at the offered hand, then back at Mira, who nodded slightly. Tentatively, Taller reached out and mimicked the gesture, his hand cool and smooth against James's. "We must report your arrival," Taller stated, looking between Mira and James. "Our leaders will want to meet you, James from Earth. But first, we can help you with your immediate needs," Mira added quickly. "You require rest and sustenance, yes?" James nodded, grateful. "And maybe a bit of help with my ship?" "We will do what we can," Mira assured him. "Come, follow us. You are safe here, James." As they led him away from the smoldering debris of his spacecraft, James couldn't help but feel a mix of apprehension and awe. The Elysian landscape stretched out before him, a vivid tapestry of flora that seemed to glow with an internal light, and the twin moons rising on the horizon. Despite the uncertainty of his situation, a sense of wonder overtook his fears. Here, in the company of Mira and Taller, James felt the first stirring of hope that this unexpected detour could lead to something extraordinary. Chapter 2, Language of Gestures. James sat cross-legged on the soft grass, his back resting against a smooth, bioluminescent tree. Across from him, Mira and Taller studied him with unwavering curiosity. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of something floral but unfamiliar. "So," James began, rubbing his hands together, "communication. That's going to be a challenge, huh?" Mira tilted her head slightly, her skin shifting from deep blue to a soft lavender. "Your device helps, but it does not capture all meaning. Our language carries layers beyond words." James frowned and tapped his universal translator. "Great. So, words aren't enough." "Not always," Taller said, crossing his arms. We express thoughts through tone, color, and movement. Sometimes, silence speaks more than speech. James exhaled and leaned forward. All right, let's start simple. How do I say hello without words? Mira raised her hand, fingers slightly curled, then opened them in a smooth wave-like motion. Taller mirrored the gesture, adding a subtle tilt of his head. James tried to copy it, but his fingers weren't as fluid. Mira smiled. Close, but you are too rigid. James let out a chuckle. That's the story of my life. He tried again, relaxing his hand. Taller gave a short nod. Better. James looked between them, his curiosity growing. And what's with the color shifts? I noticed Myra's skin changes a lot. Myra's iridescent skin deepened to a soft green, then faded back to its usual hue. It reflects emotions, but also thoughts. Some changes are instinctive, others controlled. Sounds complicated, James admitted. It is natural to us, Taller said. Just as your expressions are to you. James smirked. You'd be surprised. Humans lie with their faces all the time. Mira leaned closer, her large eyes locked onto his. And do you lie, James from Earth? He hesitated, the intensity of her gaze throwing him off guard. Only when I have to. Taller studied him for a moment. You are honest. That is refreshing. James shifted slightly. So, what do humans look like to you? Myra's expression softened. Strange, yet familiar. You do not change as we do, but your face tells many stories. Taller nodded. Your voice carries much. It is direct but layered. We must learn to listen differently. James grinned. Guess we'll both have to adjust. Mira reached out suddenly, her fingertips grazing the back of his hand. May I? James felt a brief chill from her touch but nodded. Mira traced a slow circle on his skin, then withdrew. Warm, she noted. You hold more heat than we do. James flexed his fingers, still feeling the lingering sensation. And you're cool, like polished stone. Taller observed quietly before speaking. This exchange is valuable. You will teach us as we teach you. James exhaled and stretched his arms. Guess we've got a lot of learning ahead. Mira stood and offered her hand. Come, there is much to see. James hesitated, then took her hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt like something important had shifted. As they walked through the glowing landscape, he couldn't shake the feeling that this world, these people, were going to change his life in ways he couldn't yet understand. Chapter 3. A Tour of Alicia. James stood at the edge of a hill, taking in the view below. The city stretched out like a flowing, organic sculpture, a mosaic of shimmering colors and fluid architecture that seemed to grow out of the land itself. Buildings rose in graceful arcs, their translucent surfaces catching the sunlight and refracting it into shifting patterns. The streets were alive with Elysians, their skin glowing in countless hues as they moved and interacted, each hue seemingly a wordless conversation. I still can't get over this place, James admitted, turning to Mira and Taller, who had been patiently explaining Elysian customs as they walked. You should see it at night, Mira replied. The entire city glows, the colors changing as people rest or share their dreams. She gestured toward the largest structure in the distance. There is our central dome. It houses our councils, our repositories of knowledge, and the Nexus, a place where our thoughts and ideas converge. James nodded, his gaze lingering on the swirling patterns of light. It's hard to imagine how you built all this. On Earth, architecture's more angular, practical. This looks almost alive. Taller stepped closer, crossing his arms as he studied James's expression. In a way, it is alive. The materials we use are partially organic. They react to our presence, our movements. Over time, they reshape themselves to better suit our needs. James whistled low. A building that adapts to you, rather than the other way around. That's incredible. Myra's skin shifted to a warm gold, signaling her satisfaction. We see it as natural. Alicia's environment provides everything we need. We take only what we can replace, and in return, the land supports us. Does that mean you don't have, well, factories? Pollution? James asked, a note of skepticism in his voice. Taller shook his head. Not in the sense you understand. We produce what we need without harm. Waste is unknown here. It took generations to perfect, but it is now our way of life. James crossed his arms, a faint frown tugging at his brow. We're not quite there yet. Back home, we're still figuring out how to live without damaging our planet. It's messy. Mira tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. Humans seem to thrive in challenges. You find solutions in adversity. Perhaps your messiness is a form of creativity. Maybe, James said with a shrug, but it'd be nice to have cities that cleaned up after themselves. Myra's skin shifted to a subtle lavender, signaling curiosity. Do you miss your cities? James looked away, his jaw tightening. I miss the people. My team, my friends. Even the crowd sometimes. He shook his head, a wry smile playing on his lips. But seeing this place, I don't know. It makes Earth feel loud. Taller nodded, his tone quiet. There is silence here, but it is not emptiness. We learn to listen to the stillness. James chuckled, glancing at Taller. I don't think humans have ever been good at that. We fill every gap with noise, music, chatter, machines. Mira stepped closer, her gaze steady. Perhaps you can teach us to understand your noise, and we can teach you to hear our silence. The three of them continued down the path, weaving through the living streets of Alicia. As they passed, Elysians glanced at James, their skin shifting in subtle waves. Mira explained the meaning of the colors, greeting hues, shades of interest, even the pale tones of mild caution. James found himself mimicking their gestures, earning surprised but approving glimmers from those they passed. Mira pointed out a flowing structure that seemed to hum faintly. This is a gathering place. Our people come here to share thoughts directly. Directly? James asked, raising an eyebrow. Like telepathy? Not precisely, Taller said. We call it harmonization. It is a blending of minds through sound and color. A way to align our thoughts without the need for words. James paused, staring at the building. That's hard to wrap my head around. Mira smiled. Perhaps one day you will try it. James laughed. I don't know if my head's ready for that, but it sounds amazing. They moved on, passing a series of small, glowing pools. Elysians knelt beside them, placing their hands on the surface. As they did, the water shifted, reflecting images of past events. These are memory wells, Mira explained. They store our history. Anyone may access them, see what came before. James crouched by one pool, watching as the water displayed a vivid scene of Elysians planting the first organic structures. He touched the surface, feeling a faint pulse of warmth. The images faded, and he looked up at Mira, impressed. So anyone can just look back whenever they need to? Mira nodded. It is how we learn, and how we remember our mistakes. Taller's voice cut in serious. It reminds us that the present is built on the past, and that every choice shapes the future. James stood, wiping his hands on his pants. I think we have something like that back home. We call them libraries. Mira laughed softly, her tone melodic. Perhaps we are not so different after all. By the time they reached the base of the central dome, James felt a strange blend of exhaustion and exhilaration. The day had been filled with discovery, each step revealing something new about a world that seemed to be woven from light and harmony. He looked at Mira and Taller, both standing beside him with an air of quiet pride. Thanks for showing me all this, he said. I don't think I'll ever see anything like it again. Myra's skin glowed faintly blue, a sign of calm contentment. You are welcome, James. You have shown us much as well. Taller added, this exchange is valuable. We learn from each other. James nodded, his voice soft. Yeah, I guess we do. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the glowing city, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. In this strange and beautiful place, he was beginning to understand not just the Elysians, but something about himself too. Chapter 4, Nightfall. A soft breeze rustled the silver-leaf trees as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of indigo and deep gold. James stretched his legs out and leaned against a smooth, rounded stone, which seemed to hum faintly under his weight. Mira and Taller sat a short distance away, watching the twilight deepen. The faint glow that emanated from their skin mirrored the ambient light of Alicia's nighttime landscape. "I still can't get over this," James said, gazing at the twin moons rising on the horizon. "It's like something out of a dream." Mira turned her head toward him, her iridescent eyes catching the moonlight. "Your world must be very different. What does your night look like, James?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Back on Earth, the nights can be dark and quiet, especially in the countryside. In cities, though, it's never really night. There are streetlights, neon signs, cars everywhere. Even when the stars come out, the sky never feels as clear as this." Taller, who had been silent for a while, leaned forward. "And during this night, humans must sleep, correct?" James nodded. "Most of us, yeah. It's how we recharge, process the day. We're not like you. We need those hours of rest to function." Myra's skin shifted to a warm gold, indicating her curiosity. "Why do you need such rest? If you do not sleep, what happens?" "Bad things," James replied with a wry grin. "Your body gets tired, your mind starts to fail you. You can't think straight, you get irritable, and eventually you just break down." Taller furrowed his brow. "That is fascinating. Our species evolved past the need for sleep long ago. We enter short periods of stillness, but they are more like pauses than true rest. The concept of becoming completely unconscious for hours is unsettling." James laughed softly. "I guess it would be. To us, it's just natural." He leaned back, watching as the first stars began to emerge. "I'll tell you one thing, though, nothing beats lying under a clear sky and falling asleep under the stars. It's peaceful, makes you feel connected to everything around you." Mira tilted her head, her colors shifting as if reflecting her thoughts. "Perhaps we could try this sleep, to understand it better." Taller raised an eyebrow. "That is an unusual idea, Mira. You mean to mimic their unconscious state?" "Yes," Mira said. "If we are to understand James's kind, perhaps we must experience what they do. And I am curious. James, would you teach us to sleep?" James chuckled. "I mean, I can't really teach you how to sleep. It's not like flipping a switch. It just happens when you're tired." "Then show us," Mira said, her tone calm but insistent. James considered her request. "I'm not sure if it'll work the same way for you, but I can try. Usually, you just find a quiet spot, lie down, close your eyes, and let your mind drift." Mira settled herself down on the grass, mimicking his posture. Taller followed, though he looked skeptical. "I do not believe this will work," Taller said. "We are not designed for such a state." James grinned. "Maybe not, but you won't know until you try." They lay there in silence for a few minutes, the sounds of Elysian wildlife filling the air. James's own eyelids began to grow heavy. He glanced at Mira, who remained still but not quite relaxed. "Mira," he said softly, "you're still thinking too much. Sleep isn't about trying, it's about letting go. Just breathe, slowly, and don't focus on anything." Mira turned her head slightly toward him, her glowing skin dimming. "It is difficult to stop thinking. My mind resists." "It takes practice," James said. "Just keep breathing. Listen to the sounds around you. Don't force it." Taller, still lying stiffly, finally sighed. "This is not natural for us. I do not see how." "Shoo," Mira said quietly, surprising both James and Taller. "Let's try again." James closed his eyes, not expecting much, but the stillness of the night and the soft, rhythmic sounds of the world around him began to lull him into relaxation. He could hear Myra's slow breaths beside him, steady and deliberate. "James," she whispered after a long silence, "I feel something, a heaviness in my thoughts. Is that normal?" "That's it," James murmured. "Just let it take over." The three of them lay there as the night deepened, Mira and Talar attempting to experience something entirely foreign to their kind. James drifted off, his last conscious thought a mix of curiosity and hope that they might understand, even just a little, what it meant to truly rest. Chapter 5: The Gathering Storm. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, their shadow spreading over the city of Alicia as the wind began to howl. The air carried the scent of an approaching storm, one that Mira said would be unlike anything James had experienced on Earth. Talar paced back and forth near the shelter's entrance, occasionally glancing up at the thickening sky. James sat on a low bench nearby, watching the shifting colors of the dome above them as Elysians hurried to secure their homes. "This one's coming in fast," Talar muttered, his voice tinged with unease. "Even the dome's pattern is chaotic." James folded his arms. "How bad are we talking here?" "Bad enough that no one stays outside," Talar replied. "Even our structures have limits." Mira approached, her skin glowing a deep gold as she carried a bundle of supplies. "The storm will pass quickly if we remain here. The shelter is strong." "Good to know," James said, "though I wouldn't mind some extra reinforcements." Mira set the supplies on a nearby table, her expression calm despite the intensifying wind outside. "We have endured storms before. This one will be no different." "Yeah, but I haven't," James said. "What should I expect?" Mira considered his question. "The winds will be strong, the rain heavy. The air itself will seem alive, charged with energy. But this structure is designed to protect us." "You trust it completely?" James asked. Talar stopped pacing and fixed James with a serious look. "Yes, you should as well." James nodded, deciding there wasn't much point in arguing. The air outside had grown heavier, the faint glow of the city dimming as the clouds swallowed the light. Mira gestured for him to follow her to a central area where a few other Elysians were gathered. They spoke quietly among themselves, their skin flickering with various colors. Mira introduced James, and the others greeted him with subtle gestures that he had come to understand as respectful acknowledgement. "Looks like everyone's bunkering down," James said, sitting down beside Mira. "Yes," she replied. "It is rare for a storm to come so suddenly. Usually we have more time to prepare."
As the storm broke in full force, the shelter trembled slightly. The wind roared outside, and sheets of rain lashed against the walls. The Elysians around James remained calm, their colors subdued and steady. Mira glanced at him, noticing his tension. "James, you are uneasy," she said softly. "This is unfamiliar to you." "Understatement of the century," he replied, running a hand through his hair. "I've been through hurricanes back home, but it feels different. The air is, I don't know how to describe it. Electric." Talar nodded, standing nearby. "It is the charged particles in the atmosphere. The storms on Alicia often carry these currents." Mira placed a hand on James's arm, her touch light but steady. "You are safe here. The structure will hold, and the storm will soon pass." James let out a breath, leaning back against the wall. "I trust you, Mira, but it's still a lot to take in." The storm continued, the howling winds growing louder and the rain hammering the shelter's walls. James watched the colors of the dome overhead shift and swirl, reflecting the intensity of the storm outside. Mira and Talar spoke quietly with the other Elysians, occasionally glancing at James to make sure he was all right. After what felt like hours, the storm's fury began to fade. The winds grew less violent, the rain softened, and the shelter grew still. Myra's skin shifted to a calm blue as she stood and approached James. "It is over," she said. "You see, the dome protected us." James stretched his legs and stood, looking around. "I'll admit that was impressive. Not a drop inside, and this place barely even shook." Talar nodded. "Elysian structures are designed to withstand the worst nature can throw at us. This is why we live in harmony with our environment." James couldn't help but smile. "You make it sound so easy." "It is not," Mira said. "But we learned long ago that fighting nature only brings more struggle. Cooperation is what keeps us safe." As the others began to leave the shelter and return to their homes, James followed Mira and Talar outside. The storm had transformed the landscape. The air was fresher, the trees glistened with water, and the ground seemed to hum with renewed life. Elysians walked among the pools and streams that had formed, their colors brightening as they assessed the damage and began minor repairs. "I have to hand it to you," James said, turning to Mira. "Your people know how to handle a crisis." Myra's expression softened. "And you? How do you feel now?" James paused, then chuckled. "A little more grounded. I guess storms like that make you appreciate the calm afterward." Talar's lips twitched in what James could only interpret as a faint smile. "This calm is where we thrive. Perhaps you will come to thrive in it as well, James." "Maybe," James said, his gaze lingering on the transformed landscape. "Maybe I will." Chapter 6. Echoes of the Past. The air was crisp and cool as James followed Mira and Talar through a narrow, winding path. The trees here were different, their trunks rising like crystalline spires, their translucent leaves refracting the sunlight into rainbows that danced along the forest floor. James kept his steps careful, mindful of how alien the terrain felt beneath his boots. "So, where exactly are we going?" James asked, breaking the silence. His voice echoed faintly among the trees. Mira glanced back at him, her skin glowing with soft green hues. "To one of our oldest sites. It is a place of learning, a reminder of who we once were." Talar walked ahead, his movements deliberate. "It is not far now. You will understand when you see it." James wasn't sure what to expect. Elysians rarely spoke directly about their history. Mira had mentioned that they once faced great challenges, but she had never elaborated. Talar's occasional comments were even more cryptic. Today, however, they seemed willing to reveal more. After another few minutes, the path opened onto a wide, circular clearing. In its center stood a structure unlike any James had seen before. It was made of the same translucent material as their buildings but looked older, weathered, and marked by time. Ribbons of color flowed through the walls, faint and ghostly, like echoes of something long past. "What is this place?" James asked. He stepped closer, marveling at the intricate patterns that shifted across the surface. "This is the Hall of Reflection," Mira explained. Her voice carried a quiet reverence. "It is where we come to remember what was lost and what was learned." Talar approached the entrance, his skin dimming to a soft blue. "Long ago, our people faced a great rift, disagreements that nearly destroyed us. We were divided by fear, by misunderstanding." James tilted his head. "So, a civil war?" "Not a war in the way you might think," Mira said. "It was a time of discord and mistrust. Our different regions grew isolated, refusing to communicate. The land itself began to suffer as we turned inward. Without cooperation, we could not sustain our way of life." James ran his hand along the edge of the structure, feeling its cool, smooth surface. "So, what changed? How did you fix it?" Talar turned to face him, his expression serious. "We did not fix it in one moment. It took generations of effort, dialogue, and compromise. This hall was created as a place to hold our memories. It contains the thoughts and experiences of those who lived through that time, preserved so we would never forget." James looked toward Mira. "You mean your ancestors' actual memories are in there?" Mira nodded. "In a way. Their words, their songs, their emotions. It is all recorded. The walls hold these echoes. By entering, we can feel what they felt, understand their choices." James hesitated. "That's intense. Back on Earth, we rely on books and videos to remember the past. This is something else entirely." "It is how we learn," Mira said softly. "Would you like to try?" He blinked. "You're asking me to step inside and feel all of that? Won't it overwhelm me?" Talar crossed his arms. "Perhaps. But if you wish to understand us, it is the best way." James studied the entrance, then glanced at Myra's calm face and Talar's expectant gaze. "All right," he said, taking a deep breath. "Let's see what this is all about." He stepped inside, and immediately the air changed. The space was dim, illuminated by the faint glow of the walls. Colors moved slowly around him, pulsing in a steady rhythm. As he moved further in, he began to hear sounds, soft murmurs, distant singing, the echo of voices layered upon each other. It wasn't chaotic, but it wasn't entirely soothing either. "Is this normal?" James called out, looking over his shoulder. Mira and Taller stepped in after him, their skin shifting to muted tones. "Yes," Mira said. "These are the echoes. Let them guide you." James took another step, and a wave of emotion hit him. It wasn't his own feeling, he was sure of that. It was something outside of him, an overwhelming sense of loss mixed with hope. He stumbled slightly, and Mira placed a steadying hand on his arm. "It is not easy," she said, "but you are doing well." "What is this I'm feeling?" James asked, his voice hushed. "Confusion," Taller said, stepping beside him. "The confusion our ancestors felt when they saw their unity unravel. Keep moving. You will understand more." James pressed on, the sensations shifting as he did. He felt moments of anger, fleeting flashes of joy, and long stretches of uncertainty. The colors on the walls seemed to mirror these emotions, swirling and blending. Finally, he reached a chamber at the center, where the echoes grew clearer. There, he heard a voice, calm, steady, and filled with resolve. It spoke of reconciliation, of the slow process of rebuilding trust. James closed his eyes, letting the voice fill his mind. He imagined the faces of those who had stood here centuries before, struggling to find common ground. When he opened his eyes, he found Mira and Taller watching him carefully. "Well?" Taller asked. James took a moment before replying. "It's a lot. I think I understand now why you created this place. It's not just about remembering, it's about feeling, about really understanding what they went through." Myra's skin brightened to a soft gold. "Yes, that is why it exists, so we never forget the cost of division." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I think we could use something like this back home." As they left the Hall of Reflection, James felt a new respect for the Elysians and their way of preserving their past. He wasn't just learning about their history, he was experiencing it. And as he walked alongside Mira and Taller, he realized that this experience was changing the way he thought about his own people. Chapter 7: The Experiment. James stood at the edge of the calm pool, looking down at the water's surface. It reflected the faint glow of Alicia's twin moons, their light creating ripples of color in the surrounding foliage. Mira and Taller stood beside him, their expressions curious but hesitant. "So, let me get this straight," James said, crossing his arms. "You actually want me to put you to sleep?" Mira nodded, her skin shimmering faintly in the moonlight. "We wish to understand your form of rest. If sleep is as essential as you say, it must have a purpose beyond mere recovery." "It's not something I can just do for you," James replied. "Sleep is a natural process. You can't force it." "We understand," Taller said. "But perhaps if you show us your methods, we can simulate the experience." James sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, we can give it a shot. But don't expect miracles." Myra's gaze softened. "We do not expect miracles, James. Only understanding." They moved closer to the water's edge, where a large, flat rock provided a suitable place to lie down. Mira settled herself gracefully onto it, folding her hands over her midsection. Taller remained standing, watching her intently. "You're not going to join her?" James asked Taller, raising an eyebrow. "I will observe first," Taller replied, "to see what occurs." James shrugged. "All right, Mira, just get comfortable. Close your eyes." She did as instructed, her glowing eyelids dimming as she tried to mimic James's earlier description of relaxation. "Now," James continued, his voice calm, "focus on your breathing, nice and slow. In through your nose, out through your mouth." Myra's chest rose and fell rhythmically, her form unnaturally still. Taller crouched beside her, his keen eyes studying every detail. "Her color is changing," he noted. James leaned in, noticing that Myra's iridescent skin was shifting to softer, more muted tones. "Yeah, that's good. It means she's calming down." After a few minutes, Mira opened one eye. Nothing is happening. Give it time, James said. You can't force it. Try to clear your mind. Think of something peaceful, like the sound of the wind through the trees. Mira closed her eye again, her breathing slowing once more. Taller, still observing, seemed skeptical. How will we know if she is truly asleep? You'll know if she starts dreaming, James replied. But don't get your hopes up. It might not happen. Time stretched on, the silence broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Myra's body remained relaxed, her colors faint and even. Taller watched closely, and James began to feel a strange tension in the air. What's on your mind, Taller? James asked quietly. Taller didn't take his eyes off Mira. I am considering what sleep would mean for us, if we could truly experience it. Would it alter our way of life? Change how we think? James thought for a moment. It might. Sleep isn't just rest. It's where creativity happens. People come up with ideas, solve problems, remember things better. Without it, you're stuck in a loop, thinking the same way. Taller's brow furrowed. Our people have always valued harmony and continuity. Perhaps that is why we never evolved to require sleep. But I wonder what we have lost by not experiencing it. Mira suddenly stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at James and Taller with a puzzled expression. I did not dream. James gave her a sympathetic smile. I didn't expect you to on the first try. It's something that happens naturally when you're truly asleep. You can't force it. Mira sat up, her skin gradually brightening. It felt peaceful but empty. Is that what sleep is? It's part of it, James said. When you actually dream, it's like stepping into another world. One that's shaped by your thoughts, your feelings. Sometimes it's nonsense, sometimes it's brilliant. But it's always something. Taller straightened, his expression thoughtful. If dreams are a gateway to new perspectives, then they could be valuable to our people. But how do we attain them? I don't know, James admitted. I'm not a scientist. Sleep just happens for humans. If you don't have the same biological need, it might never happen for you. Myra's gaze lingered on James. Still, it was an experience I will remember. Even if I cannot dream, I feel I have come closer to understanding you. James chuckled. Well, at least we're making progress. Maybe next time you'll get a little closer to the real deal. Mira stood gracefully, her skin now shimmering softly. Thank you, James. Even without dreams, I have learned something new. Taller nodded. Perhaps over time we will find a way to experience what you do. Until then, this exercise has been valuable. As they left the clearing, James found himself pondering the implications of what they had attempted. The act of teaching something so inherently human to a species that had never known it made him feel more connected to them, and to Mira in particular. He couldn't help but wonder if this experiment was only the beginning of a deeper understanding, both for them and for himself. Chapter 8. Dusk and Dawn. James stood at the edge of the lush Elysian field, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The twin moons were setting, their silvery glow fading into the deep blues and golds of morning. It wasn't just another daybreak for him. This sunrise marked the end of his time on this strange and beautiful world. Behind him, Mira and Taller approached quietly, their movements as smooth and deliberate as always. Myra's iridescent skin shifted to a deep amber hue, a reflection of her quiet mood. Taller's colors remained muted, as if he were focused inward. So this is it, James said, his voice quiet. They'll be here soon to pick me up. Mira nodded. You will return to your people, to your home. Yeah, James replied. He turned to face them, a small smile playing on his lips. But it's not as easy as just going back. This place, you too, it's all going to stay with me. I can't just forget what I've learned here. Taller stepped closer, his tone measured. And what will you do with what you've learned? Will you tell others of our world, of what you've seen? James shrugged, his smile fading. Maybe, if they'll listen. But I can't make them understand the way I do. They'll want facts, proof, numbers and data, not feelings. Mira tilted her head, her expression curious. But you feel this world, do you not? The colors, the stillness, the way it breathes. That is what you will carry with you. James nodded. Exactly. It's not something I can explain in a report. It's something I have to live with, something that'll change me. The three stood in silence for a moment, the soft rustle of leaves filling the space between them. James felt a weight pressing on his chest. Not regret, exactly, but something close to it. He looked at Mira, her eyes steady and filled with a quiet understanding. I never thanked you properly, James said. For everything. You showed me things I never even imagined. You changed how I see the world. Mira's skin shifted to a warm gold. And you changed us as well. We will remember you, James. Taller inclined his head slightly. Your time here was not wasted. Your presence was valuable. James grinned. That's high praise coming from you, Taller. Mira smiled faintly. You must promise to return. I wish I could, James said, his smile faltering. But I don't know if I'll ever get the chance. Then take what you've learned and let it guide you, Mira said. Even if you cannot return physically, you carry a part of us with you. James reached out, placing a hand on Myra's shoulder. The gesture felt natural now, a human custom he'd shared with someone who had come to understand it. Mira raised her hand and rested it over his. For a moment, they stood like that, the warmth of the connection unspoken but deeply felt. Taller cleared his throat, stepping back slightly. They are coming. In the distance, a small craft appeared, its sleek shape cutting through the golden sky. It moved gracefully, its engines a faint hum that grew louder as it approached. James felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. He was going home, but he was also leaving something behind. As the craft descended, Mira stepped closer to James. Her gaze didn't waver as she said, Remember what you felt here, James. Let it guide you. I will, James replied. His voice was steady, but his chest felt tight. And Mira, thank you. The craft touched down, and its hatch opened with a soft hiss. James looked back at Mira and Taller one last time, committing their faces to memory. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the waiting ship. As he stepped inside, he glanced over his shoulder. Mira and Taller stood side by side, their colors shifting softly, as if reflecting their thoughts. The hatch closed, and the craft lifted off, taking James away from the place that had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. As the ship ascended, James sat quietly, his mind replaying the moments he'd shared with Mira and Taller. He knew he would never see Alicia again, but its light would stay with him. The dawn of Alicia had become the dawn of something new within himself, a change he could not undo and would never want to.